Okay, so we are on to the final section of the ask model, which is having us determine if the information in the article itself is correct or accurate. So the first question is the information supported by research? So we're specifically wondering if there is scientific research backing up any claims that the author is making. If something is based on research, it's more likely to be correct because it's been studied. If it's just based on somebody's experience or somebody's opinion, then that can vary. What's true for one person may not be true for me. But when it's done through a scientific study, it might be more accurately applied to a general population. So there are a few places that we can look for that in your article. Where I tend to start is at the bottom of the article. Just like when you do a research project for school, you'll typically find some resources to help educate you about the topic. And then on the last page or the last slide of your presentation, you'll make a works cited or bibliography page. So that tends to be true in online articles as well. You might see at the end of the article a section called references or resources or something like that. So this particular site doesn't have that, but I'm going to show you an example of that in a little bit. Another place that you could look is within the article itself. So if the article is making claims about something, they might say where they got that information from, which study it was that educated them about that. As I read through this article, I actually don't see any of that. So when they're saying, when they're giving us information about portion control tips, or when they're giving us information about how to measure serving sizes, they're not giving us any scientific data, which kind of makes sense because there probably isn't a scientific study to say that a clenched fist is about a cup. It's just kind of common knowledge. So I'm a little torn so far about this question because while I don't see any scientific research, I'm wondering if there's a situation for them to supply it even. So I would be a little wary, but as I know, because I've done the rest of this checklist evaluation, it's true that it doesn't identify any studies that the author used to help write the article. But as we know, the article was reviewed by a medical professional. So that helps us believe that any information used in the article is factual because she is a doctor and she wouldn't put her name on the end of that article if she didn't believe that it was true. As we've mentioned a couple times already, remember that the article refers to the Choose My Plate government website quite a few times to give us some more information. I did a little bit of research about choosemyplate.gov to see if I could find out what types of research that they do when they're developing their programs. And I came across this article or this web page from their site, which is basically just talking about how they make sure the quality of the information that they post is high. They want high quality information. They don't want to be known for giving incorrect information. So I won't read this entire article to you, but basically what it's telling us is that the USDA has a mission to make sure that they have high quality information, it's objective and not based on opinion, and they want to make sure it's usable to their audiences. So that helps me believe that this information is supported by research. However, I wouldn't check this one off because I didn't see any research, so I'm kind of assuming. I feel comfortable and confident with my assumption that it's based on research, but it would be nice if they had listed where they got any of their information from, especially if it was through scientific studies. So I'm going to leave that one unchecked for now. So now I'm going to show you a few examples of what you might come across when you're looking for that first question for correct information. Is the information supported by scientific research? This is another article from Teens Health, and it's about just general some tips for healthy eating. What foods are totally fine to eat, what foods you should be a little careful of, and what foods you should probably avoid. So I'm going to scroll through this because this author has used um, something from another source, and I want to show you how I found that. So the article is talking about foods that are okay to eat, the go foods, foods that are maybe sometimes foods, the slow foods, and then foods that you should really only eat once in a while, whoa foods. I'm going to scroll to the bottom of this chart. It's kind of long. And what I see at the bottom is a source. So this is telling me that the author or authors of this website didn't make up this chart themselves. They actually got this from the U.S. National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, which is from the National Institutes of Health. So this is another government agency. So this isn't really a study that the author is referring to, but instead they're giving credit to this source for the information that they've used in this article. So that's something that can help you answer this question. So it's not necessarily scientific research, but it is research that the author did to support their claims about go, slow, and whoa foods. Another example is in an article I found from the National Institutes of Health. Again, it's a government agency. And this article says that teens who are fit tend to have a higher IQ and experience more achievement than teens who are not so fit. And this is based on a scientific study. So they did a study where they were examining the physical fitness of people compared to how well they achieve in certain IQ tests or other mental achievements. So what I looked for was where was this study done and how did the authors share with us about the study. So as I scroll through the site, I can see here at the end of this paragraph, they're telling us where that information came from, what the study was. So what they found, it says in the new study, researchers drew on large data sets to examine over 1.2 million young men born in Sweden between 1950 and 76. All the men had their physical fitness and intelligence assessed at age 18 when they enlisted for military service. The researchers, based primarily at the University of Gothenburg and the Karolinska Institute in Sweden, compared this information to details of later academic achievement and socioeconomic status from other national databases. The findings appeared in the December 8, 2009 edition of the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. So they're telling me that this study that they're writing about, this article is written about a study, was from these institutions in Sweden. It was published on this date, and the place that it was published was this journal. So that's another place that you might find scientific research. It might be written right into the article itself. They might just reference the study. And then a third one that I want to show you is another kind of similar to what I had mentioned before. So this is an example of a journal article. So this was an article that was published in an academic journal, a medical journal actually. And it's definitely not written for teenagers. It is written for medical researchers and doctors. It is not a very enjoyable read. We'll say that. It's kind of hard to get through. But this is an article titled Dairy and Milk Products, Good or Bad for Human Health, an assessment of the totality of scientific evidence. So what this entire article is about is basically looking at all of the studies that have been done about milk and other dairy products to determine whether they're good or bad for us. So these folks, these authors of this article, didn't do a study themselves. Instead, they looked at a bunch of other studies that have already been done. So I'm definitely not going to read this article to you, but I just want to point out where these authors show us where they got their information from. So they did a lot of a lot of research into many scientific studies, and they tell us about them. So the easiest place to go is right at the bottom of the article, like I showed you before, to see the references page. So I'm going to scroll all the way down. This is a huge article. You would definitely fall asleep if I read this to you. All the way down. At the end of their article, you can see the references section. So remember before I told you, just like if you do a research article for school, you will tell the teacher where you got your information, and usually you put that right at the end of your paper. So this is the references. This is where all of the authors of this article got their information from. And these are all studies and surveys. So this would be where they got their scientific information from. So if you were evaluating this site, you would definitely check this one off for being supported by research. The next question for correct information is the information current? So at first glance, this seems like a really easy one, but be careful here. So the reason that we want to know that it's current is because information changes over time. And like we talked about in class, old information may no longer be correct. It might be outdated. So, especially with health information, we learn more and more about the human body. We do more and more research, and that means different information might change over time and it may no longer be accurate. So, one thing that we can look for is the date that it was published. So, that's a good place to start because if you find that it was published in 1979, you know that information may no longer be accurate. So a good place to look for the date that it was published is at the top underneath the article, underneath the author's name. I don't see a date here. So the other place to look is down at the bottom of the article again. So underneath the article, you may find when it was published. Here, we don't have a date that it was published, but we do have a date that it was last reviewed. So it was reviewed very recently in June of 2018 by Mary Gavin, who we know is a really good source, a credible source for this article. So that tells us that Mary has reviewed this very recently, and up until June 2018, this was accurate and correct. Otherwise, she wouldn't put her name here. She wouldn't associate herself with this because she doesn't want to be known for okaying incorrect information. She wants to be known for being a valid source of information. So that's one thing to look for. But even if an article was written recently and published recently, it still could be true that the information within the article is out of date. So the other thing you want to look for is to make sure the information, the scientific research that was done is up to date. So if they mention any studies, that's something to look for. When were those studies done? So it's possible that an article could have been written yesterday, but if the author is using studies from the 1920s, that isn't going to be accurate probably. As we know, this article doesn't have any scientific studies, so we aren't sure if the content itself is up to date. But because we know that Mary, the expert, has reviewed it very recently, then I would feel comfortable giving this one a check mark. But it should be noted that since the website in the article doesn't include the dates of research done in the area, it may still be unclear if the facts or the research is up to date. Okay, we've made it to the last question of the correct information section and also the last question of our checklist. So the third question here is, do at least 3 other reliable sources confirm or back up the information? So this question is helping us make sure that other sources out there say the same thing when answering our question. If we only find this answer on this website, it probably would be because nobody else agrees with it. So if we can find some other reliable or credible sources that would answer the question in the same way, it's more likely that that information is true. So to do this, obviously we would need to be able to say what is the answer to my question? Then we'll see if we can find that same answer on other sites, and then compare the information. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of this worksheet because the very last question on this worksheet is having us summarize the information that we discovered on the website. So if we find that the website is valid and appropriate and we think it's a good one to use, then we want to make sure we know what it's saying and we summarize it here. So the prompt says, what did the website say about the topic? Include detail to be specific. This summary can be completed during the website evaluation or afterwards. So I have a pretty good feeling that this website is worth my time. I've arrived at the last question. I've gotten a lot of check marks on my checklist. So I think it would be worthwhile for me to summarize it since I've already read it. So my summary that I've already written here for you is answering the question based on what I read on the article. So I wrote, the answer to my question, how much food should I eat, will vary depending on my age, gender, size, and activity level. Generally speaking, I can make sure I'm eating a healthy amount by reading food labels, being mindful of serving sizes, keeping portions in control, especially when eating at restaurants, and to use my plate recommendations to eat a variety of foods from each food group at each meal. So that's how the Teens Health website answered my question. So what I need to do to finish this checklist is compare that answer to the answer I find on 3 other reliable sources. So if you know of some reliable sources that would help you answer this same question, you can just go directly to them. If you don't, then you may just want to do a Google search and see what you can come up with. Remember, though, you do want it to be from a reliable source. So some things might just pop up at you that seem to be reliable. Other times you might need to do a little more of an advanced search. So as I'm scrolling through my Google results, I don't necessarily just want to click on the first one all the time. I want to see what I can find that might be the best source. So I see lots of .coms. I see a .gov from Australia, and I really am wondering what the American guidelines are. This is a .gov site from the National Institutes of Health, so let's see what it says. All right, and it seems like this is more for older people, but I did find earlier another article from NIH that is more general information, not just for older people. So as I scroll through this one, I can see that it is telling me about portion and serving sizes, which is similar to what the Teens Health site said. Talks to me about how to read a nutrition label, similar as well. Keeping your servings under control, not eating the whole pint, just eating one serving. And then how much I should eat based on your gender, your age, how active you are, and your size. So a lot of similarities there. So that's one site that I feel would back up what the Teens Health site had said. I also found a couple other sites. So here's one from eatright.org. This is an organization of dietitians. This is basically for adults, parents, to help their teens eat a healthy amount. And similar to what we found on the Teens Health site and the myplate.gov site, it'll talk about how active you are and your age and how the calorie level changes. Having a variety of foods, so eating from different food groups. So some similar information to the Teens Health site. And then another one that I came across was from another medical organization, another hospital in Palo Alto. It talks about eating the right number of calories based on gender, size, activity level. having a variety of different foods from each food group, more information about food groups and recommendations there, some tips for cutting back on some things that may not be so healthy, information about portion sizes. So again, lots of similar stuff. So if I go back to my checklist, I would give this one a check mark because I was able to pretty easily find 3 reliable sources, a .org, a .gov, and another .org, that agree that paying attention to serving sizes, food labels, choosing a variety of food groups, and using My Plate are all ways to make sure you're eating the right foods and the right amounts. So if I look at correct information, I've got 2 check marks out of 3, and this one here was close because it was reviewed by a medical professional, but it didn't quite get the check mark. So 2 out of 3.